last time we hit demand. In the second screencast, we're going to talk about supply, which is the counterpart to demand. A lot of the stuff in the screencast is going to look familiar if you remember the last one. That's because supply and demand are two sides of the same coin, really. Demand is from the consumer's perspective. Supply is from the producer's or the business's perspective. So to define supply, we're going to start off with this definition. For each possible price of a good or service, the quantity that producers would be willing and able to produce of that good or service. So it looks very similar to the definition of demand, but this one's about producers and what they'd be willing to produce or supply. Again, ceteris paribus, keeping everything else equal. Now a supply schedule looks a lot like a demand schedule, but again, it's from the producer's point of view. It's again a hypothetical series of what-ifs, a series of possible prices, along with a corresponding series of quantities. Each price comes along with the quantity that the producer would be willing and able to produce if it was able to sell its particular good or service at that price. So this supply schedule is saying that if the price is $1, producers will produce 5. If they could sell it for $5, producers will produce 60. Now, there is a law of demand and there's also a law of supply. The law of supply says that as price falls, the quantity supplied will fall as well. Think about it. If you have a lemonade stand and you can only sell lemonade for a penny, are you going to really make a lot of lemonade? On the other hand, if you could sell lemonade for $20 a cup, you'd probably make a lot more. That's what the law of supply is saying. Conversely, as price rises, the quantity supplied will rise as well. Notice here that there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Unlike demand, they don't move in opposite directions, they tend to move in the same direction. And again, you can see that by looking back to the supply schedule. Notice as the price goes up from 1 through 5, the quantity supplied goes up as well. Now a supply curve, like a demand curve, is a graphical representation of a supply schedule. What we do is take each set of points and plot them out into the same kind of graph, with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. So our hypothetical data says that if the price is $1, producers will produce 5. If the price were $2, producers would produce 20, $3, 35, $4, 50. If they could sell this thing for $5, they would wind up producing 60. If you connect those points, you get a supply curve. And again, now you can go to any possible price, go over to the supply curve, and see exactly the quantity that producers would be willing and able to produce. Now, like the demand curve, the supply curve can also move. It won't move if it's simply price that's changing. When price changes, we move from one point on a supply curve to another point on the same supply curve. And like with demand, there's particular terminology here. We call that a change in quantity supplied. So again, going back to the graph, if the price were to change from $1 to $2, no need to move the supply curve. We just jump from the point at $1 to the point representing a price at $2. When something other than price changes that affects producers' willingness and ability to produce things, the entire supply curve is going to shift. Things that move the supply curve are called determinants of supply, and when the supply curve moves, we call that a change in supply. And again, notice the distinction in terminology. Change in quantity supplied means that we've moved along the supply curve and it's simply price that changed. A change in supply means that something fundamental about the product or service has changed, not the price, and the entire supply curve is going to shift. So like we did with demand, let's talk about those determinants of supply. Now generally, anything that changes how hard or easy it is to produce something, or how expensive or cheap it is to produce something, other than price, will shift the supply curve, resulting in a change in supply. Here's a few common examples. First off, resource prices. You're making lemonade, but the price of lemons goes up, the price of sugar goes up, the price of your workers goes up. Those are all resource prices, and those might all affect how much lemonade you wind up producing. Technology. You get a magical lemonade making machine that makes it twice as fast and twice as cheap to produce lemonade. Probably going to change how much lemonade you produce. Business taxes or subsidies. When the government takes money away from businesses, that's a tax. Sometimes the government gives money to businesses, that's a subsidy. Often it does that for products it likes or wants to support, things like hybrid cars or ethanol. Well, think about it. If the government taxes you as a business, it's just made it harder, more expensive for you to produce. If you're going to get less money from every glass of lemonade you sell, you're probably not going to sell as many glasses of lemonade. On the other hand, if the government subsidizes you and hands you $1 for every glass of lemonade you produce because the government wants more lemonade out there, you're probably going to produce more. Expectations. What you think about what's going to happen to your business in the future might change how much you produce now. Maybe you think that a few weeks from now, some movie is going to come out that features lemonade that's going to make everyone want to drink lemonade. Well, that might make you produce more lemonade now, ramping up for that future increase in demand. And then finally, the number of sellers. Obviously, the more sellers there are, the more supply there's going to be. All right, so let's take a look at what that looks like. If supply increases, it's going to look like a shift of the supply curve to the right. In other words, at every possible price, whether it's $5, $4, $3, or what have you, the quantity supplied isn't going to be the same, it's going to increase. Instead of producing 60 at a price of $5, if supply increases for any of the reasons I just gave, maybe producers will want to produce 80. If you shift each point over to the right and connect those points, you'll get a supply curve that's shifting to the right. That's an increase in supply. Moving to the right, just like with demand, means an increase. If supply decreases, it's going to look like a shift of the supply curve to the left. At every possible price, producers are producing less. And if you plot out all of those new points, it's going to look as if the supply curve has shifted to the left. Moving to the left is a decrease in supply. You've got to be careful with supply, because if you just look at the graph, it kind of looks like the supply curve is moving up, like it's an increase in supply. It's not. Moving to the left is a decrease. All right, to wrap this one up, let's review the terminology again. If it's simply the price that changes, we move from one point on the supply curve to another, and we call that a change in quantity supplied. If it's a determinant of supply, something fundamental about production that's changing, the entire supply curve shifts, and we call that a change in supply. Now, demand and supply by themselves don't do much for us, but something kind of magical happens when we put these two curves together, and that's what we're going to be seeing in the next screencast.
Oh! Oh my God!